And when the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." Matthew 27 verse 54. On that dark day that changed history, a Roman centurion witnessed the most significant crucifixion ever recorded. He wasn't a novice. This man, hardened by the battlefield and seasoned in the practice of execution, was commander of 100 soldiers. His life revolved around discipline, duty, and punishment. Accustomed to suffering, his task was simple: watch over the crucifixion of yet another condemned man. But this day before him hung Jesus of Nazareth. And nothing about this event would be ordinary. Jesus didn't scream. He didn't curse. He didn't beg. He stood firm in silence as he was beaten, mocked, and humiliated. The soldiers clothed him in a scarlet robe, twisted a crown of thorns, and knelt before him in mockery. "Hail, King of the Jews!" they jeered, spitting on him and striking him on the head with a staff. The centurion watched all of it. And though his face was stone, something inside him began to crack. He had seen many men collapse under pain, cry out in fear, beg for their lives. But Jesus kept a disturbing silence. His dignity shone even amid dust, blood, and brutality. That soldier, trained to feel nothing, began to sense a restlessness he couldn't explain. Who was this man who, even under torture, returned no hatred, only peace? As Jesus carried the cross along the Via Dolorosa, the scene was familiar to the centurion. A divided crowd, some weeping, others mocking. But then Jesus, with a weak yet steady voice, turned to the weeping women and said, "Do not weep for me, weep for yourselves and for your children." Even on the road to death, Jesus thought of others. They arrived at Golgotha. His body was nailed to a cross between two criminals. The crowd, frenzied, shouted for him to come down if he truly was the Son of God. But Jesus did not respond. He didn't defend himself. He simply looked toward heaven and said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." The centurion felt a knot in his throat. Never before had he heard anyone pray for their executioners. Something was rising inside him, a mix of confusion, reverence, and fear. Then the sky went dark. From noon to 3 in the afternoon, a supernatural darkness covered the land. And then the earth shook violently. The temple veil was torn in two. Stones split. Tombs broke open. The very earth seemed to cry out that this moment was unlike any other. The centurion fell to his knees and with a trembling voice said, "Surely this was the Son of God." Who was that man on the cross who could love until the end? Who was this Jesus who, even in pain, thought of his mother and his people? How could anyone show such compassion in the midst of such torment? That prayer of forgiveness, that silence in the face of hatred, that impossible peace in the presence of death. None of it aligned with what the centurion knew about human nature. And then, in the heart of a Roman soldier, a conviction was born. A seed was planted. And he would never be the same again. His world, his faith, his duty, his loyalty. Everything was shaken. Because that condemned man was no ordinary man. His voice, his gestures, his blood, all of it spoke of something beyond logic and understanding. During the trial, the high priest challenged Jesus to say whether he truly was the Son of God. And Jesus, without hesitation, with a firmness that seemed to shake the air, replied, "You have said so. But I say to all of you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Matthew 26 verse 64. These were not mere words. They were an act of divine authority in the face of earthly judgment. And among those present, a centurion was listening. When the high priest heard these words, he tore his robes in fury. He accused Jesus of blasphemy, sealing his fate. But the centurion, he didn't see a blasphemer. He saw a man who spoke with the authority of a king, knowing full well that those very words would lead him to the cross. Jesus did not beg. He did not deny. He showed no fear. He affirmed his divine identity with a serenity that was deeply unsettling. To a soldier like the centurion, trained to detect weakness, this was not the behavior of an ordinary prisoner. Jesus stood like a man who embraced his fate, because he knew his mission was greater than death itself. As Jesus was led back to the praetorium, those words echoed in the centurion's mind. "You will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power." How could anyone speak like that while walking toward execution? The crowd roared in fury. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate, fearing an uprising, washed his hands, a symbol of cowardice, a vain attempt to shift responsibility. But the centurion, he couldn't take his eyes off Jesus. He had seen prisoners scream, curse, and plead. But in Jesus there was no hatred, only dignity. When Jesus collapsed under the weight of the cross, the centurion ordered a man from the crowd, Simon of Cyrene, to help him. A small act, yet it revealed that even the executioner was beginning to see that this man was different. The procession moved forward, surrounded by mockery, shoves, and scorn. And still, Jesus did not respond with hate. At Golgotha, as he was nailed to the wood, he uttered no curses. He didn't scream in rage. He said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Luke 23 verse 34. Those words pierced deeper than any nail. They pierced the soul. Even the centurion, so familiar with pain and the dying, was silenced by such love. Jesus wasn't just thinking of his executioners. He also cared for his mother, entrusting her to the beloved disciple, John. In the midst of his own torment, Jesus still protected his own. The centurion watched, not as an executioner but as a man caught in a mystery. How could someone show such love in the middle of so much suffering? The soldiers cast lots for Jesus' garments as was custom. But the centurion, watching this trivial act, could not ignore what was unfolding before his eyes. Unknowingly, he was witnessing the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy. They divided my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment. Psalm 22 verse 18. The man hanging on that cross was not just a rabbi. Everything about this event, every word, every act, every detail, was soaked in meaning beyond human understanding. Darkness covered the sky from noon until 3 in the afternoon. It was no ordinary eclipse. It was as if creation itself mourned. And then the earth shook. Stones split. The temple veil was torn from top to bottom. The barrier between God and mankind had been destroyed. Spurgeon once said, "He did not die for the rocks, and yet the rocks were more tender than the hearts of men for whom he shed his blood." The centurion, witness to it all, could no longer deny the truth. Truly this was the Son of God. Matthew 27 verse 54. It was not an emotional confession. It was a declaration, born from awe, from recognition, from revelation. The same soldier who began the day merely following orders, now bowed before something he couldn't explain. It wasn't just the supernatural signs that convinced him. It was how Jesus lived, and how he died. The compassion, the strength found in weakness, the love in the face of rejection, the hope, even at the edge of agony. This deeply contrasted the brutality and cruelty the centurion was used to witnessing. His proclamation was an act of courage and of faith. Surrounded by fellow soldiers and religious leaders who had condemned Jesus, he didn't hesitate to say it out loud. Truly this was the Son of God. Matthew 27 verse 54. That confession wasn't a timid whisper. It was a radical transformation. A breaking point that would mark his soul forever. The centurion, a man hardened by war, became a witness to something eternal. His words stood as a testimony for all present. The confession of a man who had seen death countless times, now gave birth to a new kind of life, faith. The death of Jesus began to have an immediate effect, piercing the heart of the one who was assigned to oversee his execution. The centurion, who started the day as an executor, ended it as a believer. As the hours passed, his mind couldn't let go of what he had seen. He remembered every word, every look, every act of compassion, Jesus' prayer of forgiveness, the unnatural darkness that blanketed the land, the earthquake that shook the very ground, and his own soul, and that supernatural peace that wrapped around Jesus in his final breath. Who was this man? How could he endure such pain with such dignity? Why did nature itself seem to mourn his death? These questions began to consume his thoughts. Perhaps he remembered Jesus' words to the high priest. "You will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power, and coming on the clouds of heaven." Matthew 26 verse 64. Was this crucifixion not an end but the beginning of something far greater? The centurion, an expert in death, was beginning to glimpse the mystery of eternal life. Movie camera, if you're feeling the power of this story, subscribe now. What's coming is even more extraordinary. This is not just a tale, it's a revelation that could change your life forever. Backhand index pointing down. As he reflected, the centurion also had to face his own responsibility. He had overseen the execution of a righteous man, a man he now believed to be the Son of God. That moral weight began to transform how he saw himself and the world. He was no longer just a soldier. Now he was a witness, a man touched by divine truth. Something inside him was changing. The warrior, battle-worn and emotionally numb, was now being pierced by the message of love and forgiveness that Jesus had proclaimed, even from the cross. All the violence of his career suddenly seemed hollow. A new spiritual awareness began to emerge. He had seen many men die, but never like this. There was a holiness in Jesus' suffering, a peace in his surrender. It couldn't be ignored. This experience began to crack the hardness of his heart. His transformation wasn't instant, but it was inevitable. He began to question his beliefs, his customs, his orders. He may have wondered about the true meaning of life, power, justice. The centurion, once known for his cold precision, began to change. Perhaps he started treating his soldiers and prisoners with more humanity. Perhaps he began to feel compassion. The power of the cross had touched him. And not only him. Many others who witnessed that day were marked by it. Other soldiers, bystanders, women who had followed Jesus from Galilee. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, the mother of the sons of Zebedee. They didn't run. They watched everything from a distance, tears in their eyes and hearts shattered. Their devotion was unbreakable. These same women would be the first to witness the resurrection. They would be the first to carry the message that would change the world. Their faith became testimony. And their testimony became hope. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, members of the Sanhedrin, also stepped forward with courage. They requested Jesus' body and buried him with dignity, risking their reputations, and possibly their lives. Even among the religious elite, the cross had begun to transform hearts. And the centurion, that Roman executor, he was no longer the same. His confession marked a before and after. He was among the first Gentiles to proclaim the divinity of Christ. A living testimony to the redemptive power of the cross. A story that still moves us today. A reminder that even the hardest of hearts can be touched by grace. Mary Magdalene saw it too. She was the first to witness the resurrection. Her story, her pain, her joy, reflected Jesus' power to restore what was lost. She went to the disciples and said, "I have seen the Lord." John 20 verse 18. A woman set free. A faithful follower. A voice that ignited the flame of hope in the midst of pain. And so, the story that began with nails and blood continued with life and resurrection. Because everyone who truly witnessed Jesus that day was never the same again. And the centurion, who began as an executioner, ended as a man shaken by the agony and awakened by the truth. Moved by the agony, transformed by compassion, and marked by a death that was not the end, but the beginning of a new story. Jesus was not defeated by the cross. He conquered through it. And the centurion, the one who pierced his side, ended up pierced by eternal truth. That day, on a hill soaked in pain and darkness, a light was born, one that would never be extinguished. If this story touched your heart, imagine how many more are waiting to be discovered. Subscribe now and join us as we uncover the most powerful and hidden secrets of the Bible. Because behind every verse lies a truth that can change your life.